Okay. Okay. Welcome to Team Marsharak's presentation. My name is Tom. Working with me are Luke, Scott, and Cameron. And our game is called A More Perfect Union, the Constitutional Convention. It is, as you can see, based on Liberty or Death, the American Insurrection, excuse me, uh, and is about the Constitutional Convention. In the game, you will be playing one of four delegates to the Constitutional Convention who were major influences on the path of the Constitution, on the writing of the Constitution, who are all famous figures from American history, of course. So the goal of the game, if you are, for example, James Madison, is to get this track here, which represents the nature of the Constitution, to a certain set of places. So, for example, if you are James Madison, you care about four things, right? Everyone cares about four things. How centrally powerful the federal government is, what the balance between the influence of big and small states are, what the balance of influence of the North and South is, particularly on the issue of slavery, and what the balance between a economy that is heavily influenced by the federal government and heavily influenced by the states is. So if you're James Madison, you want a strong federal government, the large states to be a little bit in advantage, the South to be at a little advantage, and to have a strong federal influence on the economy. And things over time in the game will change the nature of these tracks, particularly events during the first part of the game, and then, of course, the issues during the second part of the game. So the game, as I just mentioned, is divided into two parts. In the first part, which we've called the gather phase, the major delegates here will be spreading their influence across the 13 colonies, gathering the delegates who are from each colony, and putting down their influence in the colonies, which will then allow them to be a little bit more influential on topics that the colonies care about. So in this phase, you have a sort of coin-style mechanism in which every turn there will be a new card drawn, which determines the turn order for that turn. On that turn, there are three possible actions each player can take. The first action is, of course, to trigger the event. The events have many different things. Some of them, like I always forget that does in Tabletop Simulator and not Tabletopia. In any case, some of them will do things like change the track here. So, for example, the Anti-Federalists, depending upon how successful you want the Anti-Federalists to be, you can choose one option or another, and this moves things. For example, if you choose the Anti-Federalist to be more successful, then they will move the centralization and state enforcement of the economy towards decentralized and state enforced. The other two things that one can do are spread their influence. So, for example, I didn't clean up very well, but that's okay. So, for example, if George Mason, say it's George Mason's turn, George Mason can put down 2 influence in anywhere that is nearby. So let's say he chooses to do this in Virginia, North Carolina. Influence is important because it lets you, you have to have the most influence in a state to grab a delegate. And it also determines what issues your influence can be spent well on when you are at the convention. So, for example, Virginia cares a lot about the eagle and the eagle, which is the presidency, and the scales, which is the judiciary. So when you do that, you can. So when we get to the convention phase, these will become more important. Until then, The other thing you can do is, as an action, is um, take a delegate out of a state and put it into your pool for the rest of the game. So, for example, here if George Mason had another turn, he'd go grab somebody from North Carolina. Finally, each player can only do one action before, basically each action once before having to completely refresh themselves as an action. So you'd like mark it. We don't have a marker for it just yet. We're still working on some of the components, as you can kind of see. We still have the the propaganda markers here representing our delegates, but you know, that'll be in the final draft that we send in whenever that gets around. So eventually, what's going to happen is, you know, all the delegates will be apportioned, and the board will be filled with the influence of various delegates. And then what will happen is the convention will start, either once all the delegates have decided to join up, or once we run out of event cards. And any delegates that are left at that point decide not to show up. So once you get there, there are two decks. There is the Guaranteed Issues deck, which basically consists of the key issues, which are things like, you know, how do you will there be an executive? How do you how do you how do you elect them, right? What the Congress is going to be, and then there's going to be some sort of non-guaranteed issues that may or may not show up. So what happens is you flip over both of these. Ooh, whoops. Shuffle them up. And in the non-guaranteed issues, there is a end of convention card, which at that point the convention will end. So then you draw some issues. For example, put out these two. And then each player will then start moving their influence. So for example, there are a number of actions you can pass and regain influence that you've spent on a previous vote that has ended. You can place infinite influence either from your pool, which is sort of reclaimed or things you haven't gotten out, or from the board onto things that things that are good for that state. So for example, here we go from North Carolina over here. Say Mason really wants to weigh in on whether there are going to be tariffs and tolls in the convention. Who gets to control that? Or you can put down some of your or you can put down some of your delegates, right? So let's say Sherman is really interested about the delegates, so he's going to put his delegates down. He really cares about legislative representation here. Once you have influence and so let's say we have that kind of like that. Once you have influence and delegates on a topic, you can then put the topic into the committee, and once it's in committee, it can be resolved. And once it's resolved, either if one player, as is kind of the case here, has enough to just take the issue, they decide which one of the options to take, and you adjust the thing. So for example, here Sherman really wants there to be, small state influence. So what he's going to do is he's going to say, well, I want representative weighting by state. So he moves that. And then these all are stuck on the card until he regains them later. If there is a tie, or if there is a kind of hung vote like this, then there are various ways to compromise. For example, one of these parties could essentially say, well, I will give you the win in exchange for something or another. Usually it's influence trading or anything like that. So that's the game. And the game ends, as I said, when the last card is drawn, or when the end of convention card is drawn. So thank you for listening, and I am pretty happy that we got to go through this. I think this was maybe a bit more ambitious than could really be made reasonably well in a single weekend. But I'm really happy that I got to work on it, and I think it's definitely an idea that I would want to maybe work a little bit more on later. All right, thanks so much, and we'll see you later.